Imagine the strategic depth of Final Fantasy Tactics and the adrenaline pumping excitement of Hearthstone colliding in an epic showdown. Welcome to Shardbound, a game where you're not just a commander or a card slinger, you're both, and every decision can cost you the win. In this video, we're going to cover off every main aspect of Shardbound, such as the key aspects of Shardbound that set it apart from other games in the Web 2 and Web 3 space, summoning and positioning your army on the battlefield, the actions each minion can make every single turn, and ultimately how to master the game and come out victorious. I won't bombard you with too much information, but don't forget to keep watching if you want to master this game quickly and dominate the leaderboards. There are many different maps available to play on, but being aware of the hex grid and different heights is important. The terrain and line of sight may give some units an advantage. Firstly, each player will build a deck of 30 cards and match the card color with their commander. However, if you equip a relic of a different color, you can now make dual color decks. For example, you could have orange and red or purple and green. Once you hit play in the top right hand corner and find an opponent, each commander will spawn at opposite positions. Remember, if yours dies, you lose the game.
Le who? The her.
Now it's time to look at the UI. Let's go from top to bottom. At the top, you can clearly see the health of each commander, and below that you can see your usernames and, more importantly, the amount of victory points each player has. This is because there are two ways to win in Shardbound, but more on that later. In the bottom left, you can view the graveyard, signified by the skull, and see how many cards are left in your deck. On the right of that, we have the super meter. This will fill when you either deal damage or take damage, and you can click this little lightning button to cast it when it's at 100% and deal 6 damage to 7 tiles in a zone anywhere on the board. On that note, you can also see your opponent's super meter in the top right hand corner, and don't group your units too much, they will get destroyed. Underneath that is your unit count. Besides the commander and specially marked characters, you are limited to 4 in any given match. In the top right, you can see the opponent's mana crystals and the amount of cards in their hand. Similarly, you can see the current mana crystals to the right of your hand. It's worth noting that large mana crystals will appear on the board over time. When you destroy these, you gain extra mana to use in future turns. It takes 2 hits for a large crystal for a permanent mana addition. Lastly, you have your hand of cards. You can play these on your turn as long as you have enough mana to support each individual's card cost, shown in the top left-hand corner. During the battle, you can conduct 4 major actions every single turn. Summon units or play spells from your hand, move any of the pieces on the board already, use abilities of the units you already have on the board, and attack your opponent's units. To summon a unit, you simply drag it onto a location on your half of the hex grid, keeping in mind that they will have summoning sickness. With few exceptions, they cannot move or attack on the turn they are summoned. Very standard stuff in CCGs. Each card has 4 key areas. The top left has its cost, bottom left has its damage it deals to opponents, the bottom right has its total health, and the center you have the ability text. At any time you can move your units, including the commander. Outside of flying units, each character can move 4 spaces. Outside of flying units, each character can move 4 spaces. Simply click the unit and left click another blue space to move it there. It can attack and move in any order. Terrain, opposing units, mana, and victory crystals will get in your way, so make sure you position accordingly. Many minions and every single commander will also have a special ability. Click on the green icon when hovering over the commander and you can then use that ability. Unless specified otherwise, each ability can only be used once per turn, and they often use mana to cast. Lastly, you can attack your opponent's minions to try and dominate the field. Melee units symbolized with swords must be adjacent to an opponent. However, as long as they have line of sight, ranged units can attack from a distance. Don't forget that the commander can also attack, and sometimes they'll be melee and sometimes they'll be ranged. What's important to note is that they won't always retaliate. A melee unit can get a free attack on a ranged unit and vice versa, and ranged units do not retaliate against each other. For example, if a melee unit attacks a ranged unit, that ranged unit won't fight back. But if a ranged unit attacks something from a distance, it also won't fight back. Remember when I said there are 2 ways to win? You can either bring the enemy commander's health to 0 or gain 12 victory points. Every time a victory crystal appears, you can attack it. Each attack grants 1 point and the 4th will grant 3 points. However, there is a caveat. The minion or commander that damaged the crystal will need to survive until your next turn to add it to your score. Be especially mindful of the enemy super, since if it defeats your minions, their victory points will go to the enemy commander, which is obviously quite hard to kill. Every decision counts in Shardbound. Dominate the board to keep your mana pool larger than your opponents. Don't give them the freedom to destroy victory crystals and make sure your commander isn't caught off guard. It is surprisingly easy to pick up and play, but to master this game is truly a challenge. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on premium Shardbound content.